Today, we're talking about how Scott Morrison is making it rain for the military-industrial complex. Scott Morrison this week announced a much more aggressive defence strategy, aimed at countering the rise of China, while acknowledging that Australia is facing challenges not seen since World War II. Quote, "We have not seen the conflation of global economic and strategic uncertainty now being experienced here in Australia in our region since the existential threat we faced when the global and regional order collapsed in the 1930s and 40s. Mr. Morrison announced a commitment by the LNP government to spend $270 billion over the next 10 years on defence capabilities. This includes more potent strike weapons, cyber capabilities, and an underwater surveillance system." So this explains the announcement last week about Chinese cyber activity, obviously laying the groundwork for dropping some fat stacks. Based on a previous white paper, the defence budget was expected to grow to 2% of GDP, equating to over $200 billion over the next 10 years, but Scott Morrison was being particularly generous. I guess he found $70 billion behind the couch, and he's adding that as well. Now, don't get me wrong, nobody thinks we should do more to buttress China's rise than me. I mean, they're a cynical bad actor. Take what's happening in Hong Kong right now as a perfect example of this, right? But given the current economic situation, which is most generously described as slightly anemic, I do think there are various other more productive ways that we could be spending $270 billion right now, which include but are not limited to putting them in large cannons and firing them out into the streets at random to create hotspots of economic stimulus. It just doesn't seem like the best use of cash that I can think of right now. I hate to piss on everyone's parade, but if China spends $178 billion versus our $38 billion, it doesn't matter how many long-range missiles we've got. It's not going to go well for us. I very much doubt China's going to say, well, their missiles go 370 kilometers as opposed to 124. Our plans for world domination have been heartily thwarted. Well done, guys. The Chinese government's military spending that they publicly admit to outstrips ours by factors of magnitude. If we ever find ourselves in a situation where we have to go to war with China, they win 7 days a week and twice on Sundays. It's not a contest whatsoever. Not to mention that if that actually happened, we would have lost our by far largest trading partner and it would crash the economy harder than it's already been crashed up until this point. In order to avoid wars, according to people like Steven Pinker, the best way to go about doing that is by investing in multilateral organizations like the UN, by keeping trade up, by having all of these factors in place as part of the Western democratic order, which people like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson seem to be taking big hearty dumps on right about now. Just a little aside, they're going to be spending $9.3 billion on hypersonic weapons, but a hypersonic NBN internet infrastructure, obviously that's too expensive to do fiber to the premises, so fiber to the node it is, you fucking plebs. Our weapons can be high speed, but our internet, not so much. This is in addition to the $80 billion submarine program, the $17 billion jet program for jets that may or may not work properly, and the regular $38 billion that we spend every single year for a nation which, I would remind you, is not technically at war. Labour's defence spokesman Richard Marles defended the strategy because of course he did. You wouldn't be a Labour minister unless you completely acquiesce to anything and everything that the LNP government asks for in terms of defence, would you? Metadata retention, sure, go for it. Cyber warfare, can't get enough. $70 billion more than the military-industrial complex itself even asked for. Yeah, no worries, mate. I can just bend over backwards for you a little bit more. Just you say when and you let me know when I'm done. Mate, I can't bend over backwards anymore for you. Peter Jennings from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute said the world had changed dramatically since the last defence white paper, particularly in the world of COVID-19. Sure, I guess because COVID is the suffix that you can just add to anything nowadays to do whatever you wanted without any real justification. Money is just conceptual at this point, I guess. By the way, doesn't that statement just more or less admit that this isn't based on a white paper or any kind of sound analysis? At this point, it's just something that the Morrison government cooked up. What's better than the 2% that the military-industrial complex asked for? How about 2.7 What about 5%? Jennings said that the Australian government couldn't afford not to direct this fire hose of cash at the military right now. Of course, he would say that because the ASPI is founded by the Australian government and funded by the Defence Force. Military-industrial complex finds military-industrial complex good. Kel bloody surprise. When we found a $60 billion hole that the government thought was for the Jobkeeper subsidy, but some nerd in Treasury didn't carry several zeros, I guess. The government said, well, that's a budget saving, while refusing to be drawn into a discussion on potentially extending this life-saving JobKeeper program that they didn't want to adopt in the first place. In some areas like childcare, they're even wrapping it up early. Which shows all this rhetoric about the budget and the deficit is all horseshit until they want to drop another $270 billion on sharks with laser beams on their frickin' foreheads or something. Then we've got heaps of cash, there's money to spare. It's a stunning and awful reminder that the government can always find money for the things it needs. For submarines and missiles and a fucking space force, but humanities and arts funding and giving you a livable wage so you can eat and have shelter in the midst of a pandemic / global economic crisis, well, then it's about tightening the belt. Money doesn't grow on trees, you bloody pleb. At the end of the day, again, as always, it comes down to priorities. They can afford everything that they prioritize. They just don't care about you. Anyway, would love to know what you guys think, as long as you don't think dumb conservative bullshit, I guess. Put your opinions in the comment section below. I look forward to fighting with you all. Thanks for watching, guys. Love your faces. See you in the next episode.